So I guess we can start. I use the microphone because you are recording it. So I hope it's for everyone. Fine that you are recording. Afterwards, the questions asked by the audience, they are not supposed to be recorded, but the first set of questions will be recorded. So welcome at Mecila, which has actually two hubs in São Paulo. This is one of the hubs at SEBRAP. I just also introduce SEBRAP in a few seconds. And the other part of Mecila is based at the University of São Paulo. For those who don't know me, I'm Sérgio Costa, professor of sociology at Freie Universität Berlin, and starting today as the in quotation marks, German director, what I'm not necessarily a German director, but so a director from Germany of Mecila in São Paulo. So as I understood, we work with two languages, Spanish and English. For those who feel more comfortable to speak in Spanish, of course, it's also possible, and then also English. I guess Portuguese is more problematic because normally people speaking Spanish don't understand Portuguese, so therefore, Spanish is very welcome. But if you also feel more comfortable with Portuguese, what I think it's not necessarily the case. This could be my case, but I'm starting in English. So this panel is actually suggested for discussing challenges of internationalization, particularly North-South cooperation, but also South-South cooperation. And let's say the main opportunity for discussing this is the presence of this really very prominent group of colleagues in São Paulo these days, also for the annual meeting next week. And especially also taking into consideration that we have representatives of the two Merian Centers based in Latin America, which is CALAS, the Center for Advanced Latin American Studies, based in Guadalajara, and Mecila, the Maria Sibylla Merian Center, Conviviality and Inequality in Latin America, based again in São Paulo. So since you are granted by the same funding line, we have also some common challenges, but also important differences in the way we are structured and we also work. So therefore, this is really a great opportunity to discuss these challenges, but also to have exchange on alternatives and also solutions we found for promoting internationalization, international cooperation, in this case, North-South cooperation at really equal footing. I think it's the main aspiration of both centers. And therefore, I think today we have this big opportunity to discuss this in more detail. Bianca Tavolari, who was supposed to be with us today, is unfortunately she actually couldn't make it, and therefore I will start just saying 2 or 3 sentences about this place in which we are today, which is SEBRAP, Centro Brasileiro de Análise e Planejamento. For those who don't know SEBRAP was created during the military dictatorship in Brazil by professors who actually were banned from the Special University of São Paulo, but also other universities in Brazil. And since then, this center has been very known not only for the excellent research, but also for the political interventions, for the presence in the public space in Brazil. Also today, reinforcing issues such as social justice, democracy, human rights, and also anti-racist movements and so on. So it's really a very broad center in terms of agenda, and the commonalities between the agenda of our center, Mecila and SEBRAP, it's quite obvious. So you can also have opportunity to discuss this in more detail, but anyway, so SEBRAP is one of the institutions which is part of Mecila, and is, as I said, also one of the hubs of Mecila in São Paulo. So let's finally start with the panel presenting our colleagues. I will start with the representatives of both Center of CALAS and Mecila, and then we have two very, very special guests with us today who are supposed also to be presented. I will start with the representatives of CALAS, Christine Hatzky, just here is a professor of history at the University of Hanover and co-director of the regional CALAS hub in Costa Rica, as I understood. So I will make a very brief introduction since we are many participants in the panel, and of course we are interested in listening to you and not to your introduction. So those who are interested can also check the website of CALAS, and you'll find there also very long CVs of the colleagues, the same for Mecila and also for our two special guests. Jaime Preciado Coronado, who is a professor of political science in Iberian studies at the University of Guadalajara and member of the executive board of CALAS. Then you have over there Jochen Kemmer, who has a PhD in history from the University of Bielefeld and is the academic manager of CALAS. Now, our colleagues from Mecila, Susanne Klengel, who is a professor of literatures and cultures, in plural, as I understood, of Latin America at FU Berlin. And over there, the last in front of me, Peter Schulze, who is a professor of Brazilian and Latin American studies at the University of Cologne, and until yesterday or the day before yesterday, the German director of Mecila in Sao Paulo. So, and now our two very special guests, starting with Christina Peters, who has also a PhD in history from FU Berlin with a quite interesting dissertation on football, if I remember correctly. And she is today with us, especially because of her very important function in São Paulo as the representative and director of the German Research Foundation, DFG, DFG, in São Paulo, is then this office, which is, as I understood, responsible for the whole Latin America. And Christina is director of this representation of DFG in Latin America. And Georg Wink, who is a professor of culture and Latin American studies at the University of Copenhagen, Denmark, has also a German background, but I think today we have with you more, while listening to you more on Denmark and Copenhagen than on German. Of course, your experience in German is also quite interesting for us. So I think this is more or less this first introduction. And then our Mecila's academic director, Thomas Amorim, who actually structured everything very well for this panel today, also formulated the first questions. And I'd like to start asking the questions formulated by Thomas. And as I see here, the first respondents should be Susanne, Jaime, and Peter, if you agree. But of course, if other participants of the panel have also some remarks on the questions, please feel also completely free to respond also to these questions. So the first question, I've just read down the question: what have been the methodological challenges and ethical considerations when conducting comparative and collaborative research across diverse national contexts in Latin America, especially when researchers from different backgrounds and power positions work together. I don't know who wants to start, Susanna?
Okay. Yes, yes, I have microphone. Okay, okay. As my name is the first one on the list, I will start. Listen, I don't know if we have to say something about Mecila, but I would like to read just our little definition of the Mecila, which we have in our research program. Mecila studies the multiple interrelations of conviviality and inequality from an interdisciplinary perspective. It focuses on processes of negotiation, legitimation, contestation, and transformation of existing hierarchies as they take place in everyday interactions and within institutions. The historical, environmental, economic, social, and political context in which these interactions occur, as well as their representations, are of central relevance. The question was about methodological challenges and ethical considerations. So I took this by the word, and I would say that we have some points which are really self-evident. I would like to mention these points briefly, and I think we see these points already when we have the applications of the fellows and when we do the interviews. So I think these points are that the selected fellows, juniors, seniors, all the people we invite here, they are always aware about their own positionality. I think we don't work with people who have never thought about their position in thinking about our topics. So this is nearly self-evident. Then I think another point which is self-evident is that the people who come here to our projects, and I think it is for Mecila the same as for CALAS, they have to bring necessarily an openness, a curiosity to engage with the topics such as coping with crisis or conviviality, inequality, and that they are willing to confront themselves with unfamiliar scientific perspectives, and that they are willing to learn, for example, from other disciplines and other political and cultural contexts. And a further obvious point is that all this needs respect. We have to respect these other traditions, other persons, and so on. So this is all obvious, I think. And then a further point, which is really obvious, is that all the people who come here, I think also for CALAS, this is the same. These people have to be willing to communicate. They want to get in dialogue and want to speak with people who come from different backgrounds. If they would not like to communicate, centers like Mecila or CALAS would not work. Yeah, but of course we have other points which are challenging, and we have solved them more or less. Yeah, and they are interesting, and this is why we are here. And I'm going to learn also. I think I would like to start with a point which is also today it's challenging, and I know that Jochen also wrote about in an email. I think there is the point of language. This is quite basic. Yeah, I start with the language. In Mecila, we have solved this quite well, I think, but we realize that it is not totally obvious. We use, for example, 3 different languages almost equally: Spanish, English, and Portuguese, and also a little bit of German. But German here in São Paulo is not a scientific language. It is, but it is a scientific language when we have events in Germany, of course. And this is important as well because we have to have an outreach in Germany as well. So, of course, these events will take in German. And what I have to say is that our fellows, what we observe, they adapt very quickly and very well to this multilingual environment. MLE, it's a good abbreviation, and I would like to mention that this term, this multilingual environment, was suggested by our Berlin staff member, Puan Wufu. She's working a lot with translation, and she invented, in fact, this term, which is quite nice, I think. So everyone is willing to dialogue and to help, even if there are difficult situations, they are willing to dialogue and to help out with translation in case this is necessary. Of course, we don't expect people to speak the languages with perfection. On the contrary, I think we all have developed a very good ear for the language switching, for possible semantic overlaps, etc. And we could provide a good assistance to avoid misunderstandings. And I would like to conclude this point to saying that this situation is very unusual in international centers of advanced studies, it seems, where English is always the central language. And we get very often a very positive feedback from our fellows about this language democracy. Yeah, I don't know how long I can speak. I have other points. Perhaps I bring it. Yeah. I could just mention 2 more points. I don't want to dominate this situation. The other challenge is that we want to have a truly interdisciplinary dialogue. Yeah, and beyond that, we want to have truly interdisciplinary work results. Interdisciplinarity is always means to work from different perspectives and requires a willingness to accept other perspectives, other terminologies, and sometimes to try to integrate these other terminologies and perspectives and concepts in their own project and to adapt these in their own project, to develop it within the own area, and even to transform this concept. So there we are really would be in a very nice interdisciplinary situation, but this is not easy. We all know that this is not easy, and as a person working in literature, I could also explain how it works for us in literature, but I leave this out. And I would like to mention, last but not least, an ethical challenge, which is that our centers want to be really open for the academic community and to enable traditionally marginalized and underprivileged researchers to access to our programs. So in Mecila, we always strive for the greatest possible diversity, which we do in fact manage sometimes better, sometimes not so good, but we really want to try and to practice to be a diverse center. And but this is also a challenge because we have to follow also other criteria, like, for example, the proportion of Germans in the center and Latin Americans and the rest of the world. And this has to be in a good proportion, and also we need a proportion of men and women. Yeah, so the question of diversity has to cope with this, and sometimes there are obstacles which we do not imagine, because there can be juridical obstacles as well. Yeah, because, for example, in Germany we cannot speak about, we cannot put as a criteria ethnic or race, ethnic belong. Yeah, so I would like to stop here, not to speak too much. So thank you. Yeah. Oops.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. Thanks to Tomás and Sergio for this invitation. It's a pleasure to be with you. I'm going to speak something about the what is actually CALAS, because we have passed deep and long evaluation. Fortunately, it was very good, the evaluation of the center. But anyway, just at February from the next year, we are going to change something that I have talked now. We will have less budget, but we have an academic and practical project that is very good too, and I'm enthusiastic about that. Then about the first question, the transdisciplinary research of CALAS focuses on the multiple aspects of crisis, that big word, no? And change processes that are provoked, accelerated, decelerated, perceived, and reflected upon by different social actors. At CALAS, we ask what strategies for dealing with multi-level crises emerge in the process. How can new approaches to problem solving, including those of a transregional character, and we ask if these are some ways to be effective or institutionalized. Questions such as these are explored in the context of the CALAS research matrix, which consists of 4 interconnected and intertwined research clusters. 1, vision of peace, transitions between violence and peace in Latin America. 2, confronting inequalities in Latin America, perspectives on wealth and power. 3, confronting environmental crises. 4, regional identities in multiple crises. That we call laboratories, and for the moment there are 4, but for the next period of CALAS, it will be 6 different laboratories. If I have the opportunity, I would talk about it. These research groups, by the moment, are complemented by 2 transversal conceptual axes. One is the methodological theoretical meta-reflection on theorizing the crisis, and the other is reflection on the roles of the centers of advanced studies and academic knowledge production in Latin America in the global knowledge society. In addition to the research groups and the transversal axis, invited researchers from partner institutions carry out stays at the 4 CALAS sites, Central America and the Caribbean site, San Jose de Costa Rica, Andes region site at Quito, Ecuador, Southern Cone and Brazil site at Buenos Aires, Argentina, and the coordinating site in Mexico at the University of Guadalajara, which I belong. The results of the fellows' research are presented at each site, and depending on the evaluation made by the board of directors, they are published in their own collections or in coordination with CLACSO, including publications in English, such as a routledge. All publications are formatted appropriately through the CALAS web platform. It is important to consider the working method of CALAS, the platforms that arise from the laboratories, and what we call transatlantic tandem, in which European and Latin American researchers meet with the express objective of doing comparative research between one side of the Atlantic and the other. In the case of the laboratories, there is no systematic follow-up by CALAS on the comparative research that eventually emerges from the platform. In the case of the invited fellows, there are no systematic results that require comparative research to be carried out. I must say that in the case of the transatlantic tandem, it was a contrasted experience because when we make the call for present papers, there is not a very good result. But anyway, some groups are until now exchanging his experiences from both sides of the Atlantic. And well, as I told you, maybe in other opportunity, I could call about the new age of CALAS. Thank you.
Thank you, Juan.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. I think I'll just make some complementary remarks, basically also to what Susanna said, and maybe focusing a little bit more on the power relations, which was part of the question as well. and on the collaborative research. So I think it's really great to have these Merian centers that really provide a great possibility of collaboration of very different researchers, transgenerational, of course. So we have the doctoral researchers, which always really give a really great input, I think. Then there are the juniors and the seniors, of course. And then we have these renowned international scholars like Georg, who will be at the center for a week and give input. And it's, of course, very interdisciplinary. And that's all really great. Nonetheless, I think there are some power inequalities, which are actually at the heart, I think, of the educational system, which I think is a problem. And language comes in here too. Because, of course, if you look at a lot of the universities, especially the ones that do integrate students that come from a socially less privileged background, then they usually, for example, don't speak any English, which is a problem in many cases because English, of course, is one of 3 languages, but it's still a central language, unfortunately. So if you don't speak any English, then you're probably not going to be here. But you might be actually speaking 4 different languages, one being Spanish, the other Portuguese, and the other Makushi, for example, or Iguana, or looking at the different frontier regions, and then you actually don't come to São Paulo. And also because you're in the periphery even. If you're talking about peripheries in Brazil, for example, the north, or if you're talking about different countries, for example, like in Argentina, where there is a problem, for example, financing the stay, which of course Mecila does provide. But I mean, I'm just trying to hint at some of these problems that come in, I think. So people who actually, and I'm trying to be brief here because I would like to touch on other points as well, but people who actually don't come from the more centric university systems, they are not really in, and so also their perspectives don't come in so much. And now I would like to touch on the point of the transdisciplinarity, because the interdisciplinarity is a strong point. So we have all these different disciplines that dialogue, I think, very well, but the transdisciplinary, and some universities like UFMG, for example, has programs on traditional knowledge, which is great actually. But people who don't come so much from an academic background, but are still specialists, especially in inequality and also conviviality, they are kind of left outside. But, and I'm not trying to critique the Merian programs and Mecila. On the contrary, I think we're trying the best to integrate these people. So actually what we have done, we have been dialoguing with people who don't come from an academic background or who do come from an academic background, but don't have an academic position. And they actually dialogue with us. They might be representatives of civil society, they might be activists, for example, or they might be artists. So actually we have organized a lot of conferences, for example, or even different, less traditional academic formats where they actually really brought in very important impulses for our research and also for collaborative research. So I think that is a very important point. And I think we should try to actually to establish this more, I would say. So that's the transdisciplinary aspect. In terms of diversity, I also agree with Susanna that it's and with the program in itself that we try to actually integrate people of diverse backgrounds, but it's often a challenge. Also a challenge, for example, in really and we really spread the calls quite as good as it gets, I think. But then how will you reach people who are not at the center of the university system? So I think that's one of the challenges also we have. And there, I think it's good also that we're at USP Sebrapi, because there we have also different channels of communicating with people who are not at the heart of our, I think, of our network, maybe. Always. And also that, for example, USP has a pro-rectory now, which I think is very important, that is inclusion, inclusão e pertencimento, which is great. So I think also working together with Alcani, so to touch on the good points here, I think of Mecila and São Paulo, that we're really reaching out to have more diversity, I think, in our program. And yeah, I don't want to monopolize too much, so I'm just going to stop here.
Thank you, Peter. So, Christine, you also add some points to this question. Just a brief comment before I pass the word to you, Christina, is on this issue, interdisciplinarity, transdisciplinarity, because at least according to our experience in Mecila, I think we have been able to create spaces for transdisciplinarity. I would especially put emphasis on the two civil society workshops we realized. So the first one in Mexico City at Colmex about indigeneity, what we really was a very, very interesting workshop. And the other one was this year in Berlin with climate activists from Latin America and Germany discussing climate interdependencies between Europe and Latin America. And this is a crucial issue because somehow the so-called energy transition in Europe has been made to a certain extent creating new problems for Latin American. If you look at the spaces of externalization of costs for climate transition and so on, this point came very clear in the discussion between activists, climate activists, being, indigenous movements, also Quilombola representatives were there in this seminar, in this workshop in January and so on. But I think the big issue is to create channels between these both spaces, the space of interdisciplinarity and transdisciplinarity. Until now, I think we have succeed in have both spaces, but not in integrating both spaces. And I think this could be one of the challenges for the third phase of Mecila. Just a clarification, CALAS is in a very fortunate situation to have been approved for a third phase, and we will apply for a third phase next year. So therefore, we have also to learn with you how to actually go to this sort of proof and also to be approved for the next phase. But finally, you, please.
Thank you from my side for the invitation for this workshop. Just when we came in, we were talking, why didn't we do such workshops between Mecila and CALAS before? Or we had exchanges, but we all came to the point that our agendas were so full in the main phases. So it was really difficult because we have the biggest projects in the history of German Academy in the Humanities and Social Sciences in exchange with Latin America. So it was a huge challenge to make something very good out of this inversion from the ministry. I think I have probably a perspective on all for the first question on all these methodological and ethical challenges we face in CALAS and in Mecila. We just came from a workshop in Quito on the concept of horizontality that has been a center concept for building CALAS. And our workshop now, after almost having completed the main phase, was really a kind of reflection, and also a kind of reflection what horizontality means at different level. Horizontality between Germans and Latin Americans in Mecila. Horizontality between the South-South exchange in Latin America. And horizontality, for example, diversity questions, but also what all of you mentioned, how to integrate non-academic knowledges. And this is also for us, has been also from the beginning a huge challenge. How can we address our questions? I mean, we as academics from the humanities and social sciences want to give solutions to societal, environmental, and other crises, but we have to dialogue with society and with activists. This is and this was kind of a continuous reflection how we can do this, and we our formats, for example, of the platforms was a kind of format where we tried to realize this, not also inviting academics, but also opening it to political activists, to poets, to musicians, not just to build up a dialogue, no? Because and taking into consideration that not all people listen to academic presentations, but have probably we can make consciousness about other through literature, through music. So, but this is, I think we managed this quite good, and the platform was a good format to integrate other non-academic actors. CALAS for me is also a place and of a continuous trying to change perspective. Being a Latin American historian in Germany, I have to teach, I research about it, but it's always a challenge for me to change perspective, and CALAS has been that place and still will be that place for a continuous training to change perspective, because in all our discussions in different formats in the laboratories, but also between us, between all who participate in the nucleus of CALAS, it's this is one of an exercise, a very important exercise. When we wrote the first application from CALAS, our lemma is coping with crisis. We tried already to introduce this, our willingness to change perspective, and coping with crisis means in CALAS that we don't see Latin America as normally the whole world sees Latin America as a continent of crisis. But we were, and Jaime presented our working spaces in the laboratory, is we try to change the perspective. How do Latin American societies cope with the crisis? How their solutions? We were interested in their solutions, and we found out they have many solutions. And it's always decide to change from outside, looking from outside to a continent, to a society, or trying to look to get a perspective from inside. And I think, and I speak of my laboratory that I created and directed, Visions of Peace, transitions from violence to peace in Latin America. And we really, in long discussions, especially with our Latin American fellows, we worked out a perspective from peace. Not, okay, everybody is writing and discussing violence, but we try to find out how activists and civil society and societies try to cope with this, with violence, and try to find peaceful a peaceful conviviality. So I think I stop here.
Thank you. So with this, we can go to the second question, as I said before, formulated by Thomas, but it's also a quite interesting question. So therefore, I would ask the question exactly as formulated by Thomas. Recognizing Germany's role as a sponsor and center of reference in the global north, what practices can ensure that their research agendas are relevant and responsive to the needs and priorities of the global south, promoting horizontal collaboration in an asymmetrical environment? What are examples of best practices and the biggest challenges? So following the suggestion, Susanna, Jochen, and Georg are invited to respond to this question. Yeah, perhaps with, yeah.
Okay, so thank you very much. And I will also start by thanking Thomas for organizing this round table, and to my colleagues, and also like to thank Susanne for introducing the concept of the multilingual environment. And I think, will start to put this in practice. And no, voy a continuar entonces en español para que hacer esto, ¿no? Una realidad y no solamente una propuesta y una teoría. Y claro, respecto, digamos, a esta pregunta de las agendas del norte y del sur, y no como, digamos, ¿no? Cómo se pueden compenetrar las agendas, cómo se pueden crear esas cooperaciones en la realidad. Yo creo que hay que reflexionar desde el inicio cuando hablamos, ¿no? ¿Cuáles son las agendas del norte? ¿Cuáles son las agendas del sur? ¿No? Porque esto crea desde el inicio nuevamente una distinción que creo que en la práctica no es tan evidente. Claro que eso, o sea, es un punto que seguramente a ustedes en Mecila, a nosotros en CALAS, cuando nos instalamos en nuestros respectivos países y en regiones y explicamos, ¿no? qué es lo que vamos a hacer, cuáles son nuestras agendas de trabajo, nos preguntan, ¿y realmente qué es la agenda? ¿No? ¿Qué quieren los alemanes en México? ¿Qué quieren los alemanes en Brasil, en América Latina? Y es justamente eso, creo que nuestro primer desafío, mostrar que no estamos aquí para vender carros, para ¿no? buscar litio o lo que sea, sino que para crear una agenda común, integrada de investigación. Entonces, en este caso, ¿no? Lo que Cristina mencionó, que no, o sea, no en el caso de la agenda de afrontar la crisis desde América Latina y no en América Latina, es justamente una de las ideas, ¿no? De que tenemos problemas en común, la violencia, la desigualdad, la crisis medioambiental, que puede que tenga diferencias entre lo que está aconteciendo en Europa, lo que está aconteciendo en América Latina. Sergio lo mencionó, que obviamente no, los ideas o proyectos, cómo solucionar la crisis medioambiental en Europa, lograr la transición energética, tiene un impacto directo en América Latina, en otras regiones obviamente también en las agendas. Pero sí, al final son problemas globales que nos confrontan a todo el mundo. Entonces ahí creo que en ese sentido lo primero es explicar y crear un ambiente de investigación en que las soluciones, las prácticas que vemos aquí, ¿no? Por ejemplo, en el caso de la resolución de conflictos, que seguramente en América Latina tiene sus particularidades, pero que también de allí se pueden sacar conclusiones que son también válidas para otras regiones. Entonces creo que eso sí es un punto importante de no distinguir una agenda del norte y una agenda del sur, sino no ver los puntos en común que tenemos en nuestra investigación y ver dónde funciona, dónde no funciona, cuáles son los contextos particulares en cada una de las regiones, lo que dificultan, ¿no? la búsqueda de soluciones. O sea, ¿no? Los dos centros tienen un enfoque también sobre el tema de las desigualdades. Yo sé que, ¿no? En Berlín, con el gran grupo de desigualdades, eso tiene una larga tradición. En este caso, por ejemplo, ¿no? Cuando nosotros trabajamos el tema de las desigualdades, queríamos cambiar un poco la perspectiva y no tanto investigar la pobreza, o sea, ¿no? Como, ¿no? Estudiar, digamos, ¿no? Los capas desaparecidos, sino estudiar también las estructuras que han creado esas desigualdades, porque desigualdades no solamente son... ¿no? Son los pobres, sino también son los ricos, son las élites. Entonces, estudiar también, ¿no? ¿Por qué no funcionan mecanismos de retribución? ¿Por qué no? ¿Cuáles son los desafíos? ¿Cuáles son los obstáculos, por ejemplo, para llegar a reformas fiscales más justas, más retributivas, ¿no? Sean en América Latina gobiernos de izquierda, derecha o de lo que sea, y lo mismo vale para Europa, ¿no? Ahí también no sería simplemente otro ejemplo donde vemos que, ¿no? Que hay muchos desafíos que no se, digamos, no los encontramos solamente aquí en América Latina, sino también en Europa y donde encontramos los mismos desafíos. Y creo que con este punto ya voy a ceder el micrófono a...
Thanks for the invitation and thanks for the interesting question. I see my role more like a wild card, maybe, and I'm learning a lot from the debate, from my perspective, north of the north, right? And I'll try to give you some short insights. If they are not relevant, they're at least amusing, maybe. And so whatever we do in the Nordic countries, it is under the shadow of what is called Nordic exceptionalism. And that is, of course, related to the Nordic model, which you all know. And it's no coincidence that you all know it because you have been exposed for more than 20 years to a branding campaign. And that was the Renaissance of Nordicness, the joint initiative of the governments in 2006. And it is a joint strategy to consolidate the Nordic countries as global winner region, quotation marks. That's really how they call it, right? And so that's a bit a problem, right? Because the Nordic model is kind of a gold standard, and that does not leave room for self-scrutiny, right? And so, you know, it's about education, PISA, and green growth, whatever that is, social welfare, equality. Gender equality is what distinguishes Norway from Saudi Arabia, I guess. And that's the perfect model. But of course, there are fissures, right? And it's not as it appears to be. For example, equality, if you look at wealth equality, Sweden is just like Brazil, but that's a taboo. You can't even put that on the agenda. You can't even discuss it. And then suddenly our collaboration with our Latin American partners helps us to somehow introduce that to the agenda. Because then we can say, why is inheritance tax in Sweden 0? And now in Brazil, there's a huge debate about increasing or not the 8%, whatever, right? So we kind of, we have to use the model to subvert it in a way to introduce topics which are not really seen as relevant. And there is a practical constraint because for whatever research we do, we have to prove Nordic added value. And if not, you don't have any chance to get funding. And Nordic added value, that's of course about synergies, cooperation among the Nordic countries. It's about competitiveness, winner region. It's about Nordic identity, but it is also about demonstrating Nordic solidarity to the world, and by that enhancing the Nordic international influence. And that's the open door we can use, right? Because that is actually what connects the Nordic countries to Latin America, because it's not so much about migration, it's not so much about trade, somehow business, but that's of course a lie. Also, if you look at Equinor or $26 billion invested in Brazil, or if you look at that Danish company dominating the insulin market in Brazil, right? But it's not, it's under the radar, right? So it is always about solidarity, Olof Palme, and what used to be called aid, right? And that was really important. So even like hardliners like Jens Stoltenberg, they have a past in the Nicaragua solidarity movement and so on. It used to be very important. And we kind of built on that solidarity identity feature, right? And then we use like two other characteristics of exceptionalism, Nordic exceptionalism, which don't have anything to do but be kind of abuse of them. And that is, it might come as a surprise, but the Nordic countries see themselves as a periphery, right? Because they are periphery to the big powers, to Europe and so on, and they see themselves as small countries. And there's a whole political theory about small states and small state alliances and so on. And that is really high on the agenda. And that's where we then try to sell our cooperation by saying, look, you have the perfect partner in Latin America because they are also periphery and they are also small states. Not in terms of population, it's more than 5 million, but it's about a projection, right? That's the point, the projection. And then we try to bring in a research agenda where that's a taboo also, but here the collaboration really helps us to put to light things that are usually excluded in the Nordic discussion. And that is even more exceptionalism. It's about the internal subalternity, and it is about the colonial frontier, right? Internal subalternity, because the Nordic countries have their ethnic minorities, like the Sami people, the Forest Finns, or the Inuit people in Greenland. So with the eyes of a Latin Americanist, you can recognize so many things in that coloniality, which if you don't have that background, you wouldn't even see it, right? And the other thing that is about the extractivism, neo-extractivism, and the colonial frontier. So for example, like Belo Monte in Brazil, you have similar stories in the north of Norway with exactly the same problematics, and it's indigenous people being affected by that, or mining in northern Sweden, right? In the territory of Sami people. And there are so many similarities, right? But this is completely excluded from the discourse. And when we then bring in like colleagues from Latin America and discuss with them, we suddenly get to conclusions we then can share with decision makers in the Nordic countries. And that really, really helps a lot. And that's probably also the function, because our only way to justify it, right? Then we can say it's added Nordic value because we better understand our own internal coloniality and internal subalternity.
Oh, yeah. I was very much absorbed now by these perspectives. Very, very, very interesting. In fact, I don't have much more added value, because I just I would continue with what Jochen said. Where did I have my, yeah, I think a challenge is really for all of us is really to build these international networks, international in the sense of really international, global south and north, which is based on trust and symmetrical relations. I think this question of trust is very very important. I think as well that we really always need to see that we have to compete as well with other centers, with our specific constitution of as centers in the global south. So we have to look for excellence as well, yeah, as excellence, and to be able to compete, because the knowledge which is produced in our centers is really very important. And as Georg very well explained, it is important also in this sense. I have never thought about, I must say, yeah, but it's very obvious what you explained. And well, I think in fact this is what I wanted to add to this question. It's about knowledge, yeah. It's knowledge production which has to be more made more visible in the international discussion, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, I know. I wanted to say something additionally. I think one of the big challenges is really to look for continuity for our centers. I think this is probably the same problem for CALAS as for our centers. It would be really important that that our work here would have continuity in the future, because one day this the center will end, the financiation will end, and then we have a lot of experience, yeah, and it would be really important that there will be structures developed. This is a difficult question, to continue this knowledge production, this experience we have got to the future. And it is not only in this debate among us. I think this is a political question which we have to transmit also to people who have deciding power in the politics in Germany and in other countries as well. Hopefully this will work.
Thank you, Susanna. So we're going to the third question. The third question is about funding. And I think it's quite obvious that the funding possibilities in Germany, Europe, and Latin American countries are quite different, are quite asymmetrical. And the question asked by Thomas is, what kind of impact these differences on availability of funding have for the relations for cooperation between these different countries? And here in the list is suggested that Christine, and Georg answer the question.
So I think I'm the next one on the list. I will just start. Yeah, thank you, first of all, for inviting me. Well, yes, I think I'm the one that brings then really the funding perspective in here today. And I have to, I think I have to say some words about the DFG before I start with my considerations, maybe, because maybe not everybody is acquainted with what the DFG is and does. The Germans are, but maybe the ones here that are not from the German system don't know so many things about the DFG. Well, the DFG is a German funding organization, and I think what is always interesting to emphasize when we talk about the DFG, which is quite an important funding organization for third-party funding in Germany, is that it is not a governmental organization, and it's not even directly linked to a ministry. It's by civil law an association where German universities and research institutions are members. And that's very different from other international funding organizations. And this is interesting to say because this defines very much the funding principles of the DFGs. It's a funding organization that always emphasizes that it funds basic research, and it's very open to every topic and every area of research. So it doesn't define any research topics to do research on. And this is different from many organizations that the DFG collaborates with when it comes to the international collaboration. I'm stressing that because this defines and describes and explains many challenges that we have when we collaborate internationally, also in Latin America. And when I talk about the research funding relations that we have in Latin America, where we are present since 2011 with an office here on the realms of the German Center for Research and Innovation with many other universities, then I always describe it also from this very German funding perspective, obviously. And I would like to speak a little bit more for the case of Brazil, even though we also have collaborations with Mexico. And on the one hand, it's a success story that we have in collaboration with Brazil. And on the other hand, there are many challenges also. And I think one very important point is that we have this very strong fluctuations of co-funding, because the DFG always works with co-funding. We cannot directly fund research to be done in other countries. We can only match funds with our partners abroad. And when we look at the collaborations in the last 2 decades with Latin America, we have very strong up and downs of this collaboration when it comes to funding and the money put in. And when we look at Brazil, many of you know that then we had a very, very sharp increase of funding in Brazil during the second Lula government and the Dilma government. That was when the Ciências Sem Fronteiras program, the Science Without Borders program was launched. Although this was not really a research program, it was a mobility program. But when we talk about this period, we must say it was rather an exception than a rule. So when we look at funding now, then we talk about a longer period of austerity, of scarcity of funding. And this is really challenging, although this has become better in the last year and with the government that Brazil has now, because there is another discourse when it comes to science and research. And we have also, again, an increase of funding also in the Brazilian system. But what I would like to stress is that when we talk, for example, about Brazil, and this is also, I think, the case for Mexico, we talk about a very regionally and sectoral differentiated science system that on the one hand is very resilient and robust to these very short-term fluctuations, but on the other hand shows a lot of asymmetries when we look a little bit more in detail on it. And one thing that we see is the very uneven distribution of funding regionally, because we have a very strong funding in the state of São Paulo, because Brazil has the state funding from state funding organizations, where we have the FAPESP, with which we have a very strong collaboration also, and which absorbed also a lot of research in the last years, where there was a scarcity of funding on the national level. This is on the one hand very positive, but this is also a problem because this increases inequalities further, because you need money when you do research. You build up money-intensive infrastructures in particular, and they are being built then in the southeast of Brazil and not in other regions. The current government I see is trying to counteract to this development, but this is really a big challenge to do that. And still the FAPESP is very strong when it comes to funding. It has almost the same funding budget as the CNPq, which is responsible for the national funding. And this puts a great challenge to our collaboration because what we would like to do is to have a collaboration, a nationwide collaboration with very evenly and equally distributed funding possibilities. And we do not have that. We have now a very open discourse or discussion with the CNPq again, but this is very new, and we never know until when we can held this dialogue open, because what we see is very short-term decision-making when it comes to research strategies that are implemented nationally. So this is, I think, a challenge that we have not only in Brazil, but also in other collaborations with Latin America. Also with Mexico, we saw that this was challenging in the last years, where we had a very strong collaboration with CONACYT, that then ended very abruptly, and where we then came in with a strong collaboration with university, with UNAM, what is great and what is working very well. But as you can see, it's one institution, and where are the other institutions represented that are doing strong research, but that we can't complement when it comes to co-funding of research. So these are just this is just an overview of the challenges that we have when it comes to the collaboration with Brazil and Mexico, but this also counts for other countries.
Yes, I'm not sure if I really have a lot of meaningful things to say about that, especially after your wonderful panorama. So I think the point I could contribute with is that problematic of the added value, which is very telling, I guess, right? And the reason is, of course, the harsh pressure from the Nordic taxpayers, right? So there is a lot of pragmatism in that, and for whatever money is used in scientific collaboration, it really must be shown that the outcome is positive for the Nordics, because Latin America and the Caribbean are considered a self-sustained region, right? Not in need of any help anymore, right? From the Nordic perspective. And so there is not that much of cooperation, even though sometimes there are crucial projects. So if I think about Norway and Colombia, for example, I didn't want to kind of ridicularize the Nordic attitudes, because Norway was really crucial in that peace process, right? And there are interesting projects ongoing, collaborative projects. But what I always hear from the colleagues is the problem to equilibrate the spending, because usually the money is always reserved for the Nordic participants of the projects. It's extremely difficult to bring somebody in, or to kind of employ somebody in Colombia, for example, in that case, right? So I see a lot that actually cooperation is done with more funding from the Latin American side than from our side, which might also be an effect of that branding, right? So there is a strong interest to collaborate with us, and then usually also the funding is asymmetrical in that sense, that the money comes more from Brazil. I'm thinking specifically about these many delegations we have had during the last years coming to Denmark and wanting to learn about zero corruption and trust, right? Because notoriously Denmark is on the top of the corruption perception index, right? And then of course this is exactly like before, it's not true, right? And then we have to engage in an interesting dialogue where the Brazilian partners learn that corruption is not perceived in Denmark because nobody knows exactly what it is, right? And on the other side, maybe what can be learned from Denmark is that there is no way to zero corruption, because you will always have some kind of improvised handling with some gray zones, right?
Thank you very much, Christina and Georg. When I saw the question, I was not sure whether I have a very good answer to it, because I'm not looking from a perspective as Christina does. But I will take up some wishes, how probably to taking up what Susanne said about the continuity of our projects. This is a real concern for us, even more because we are a little bit further thinking about, and we had to write about continuity in our application from the transition phase. And yeah, probably it would be it would be good for other funding institutions to take up all the work we did with this huge projects, to think about what makes sense for a continuity, what to take up, because of course the ending of financing is a concern, and it's a huge challenge. Who can fill the gap? And I think it's very important to take up this when the projects end, and not to wait 10 years more, because we all will be vanished, and take up all the huge wave we made, and to think about already now what makes sense to give continuity on. Also think about, and we all did it without making a program point out of it, synergy effects between different projects, and we tried to really find out synergies between projects. For example, we in Hanover and Costa Rica, we were part of a European Union funded project, a network project, Connect Caribbean, and we very sensefully could use and to intertwine the two projects and add more exchange spaces, no, because this network projects makes academic stays possible in Latin America and Europe for everybody who takes part in this project. I think, of course, we do not all depend only on financiation when we think about academic exchange. We have also built personal relationships that will continue afterwards. Nevertheless, it will always be important that we can have a direct personal exchange. I mean, we had all the experience of pandemics, and we have all experienced that it is possible to keep up a dialogue via Zoom and digitally, but nevertheless, we must keep up presence formats, especially in times where it's not so easy to dialogue, in times of of shortened budgets, and where you have to know when you have problems, it's personally presence is very, very important in such an international exchange. I want to keep up another point, or take up another point that Georg mentioned. All the funding institutions, for example, in Germany, have to take into account that we are keeping up spaces of discussion in our societies as well, and we can we keep also, we are talking about Latin America in our disciplines or in our interdisciplines. We keep up spaces for diversity and open societies as well in Germany, and this one has to take in mind, no, because we have a double function. We work in Latin America, but we take up the experience from Latin America and the discussions and bring them back to German society. Another thing is that interdisciplinarity is a challenge for DFG, because they are funding very much still in disciplinary spaces, and this has been, for people who come from regional studies, been a challenge from the beginning. So how to place our projects into a funding form of DFG, and I think this is, I mean, we are discussing this for a long time, and we should continue, because this interdisciplinarity is also kind of internationalization, because projects like we do, like Mecila and CALAS, cannot be disciplinary. And all what we pointed out, what is important for our projects, also the transdisciplinarity and the changing of perspective, cannot take part in only a disciplinary view. So I think I stop here. Thank you.
Thank you, Christina. So the next question is also about funding, because it seems that the period, as you say in Portuguese, of vacas gordas, of the fat cows, if you can say this in English, is no longer there. So meaning that there is, we are expecting a period of very hard cutting in funds, especially in Germany. I think in Brazil we have just now another situation. In Mexico, I don't know exactly what is expected with the new president. But I think this is also expected for the whole Europe. So if you imagine, not only for budgetary reasons, so you have less money today for investing in science and in research, but you have also political constraints for investing in internationalization. So if we imagine how the established parties made concessions in terms of migration policies for the far right and right-wing parties, if you apply this to the sciences and research, so in few years you don't have any grants for internationalization because the pressure of the nationalist parties. So this could be, I hope this is not a, let's say, a real scenario, but it's a scenario that you can expect. You can just imagine to transfer this sort of reaction of the established parties in relation to migration policies, to sciences, to research. So the result will be how to finance a center in Brazil. So it's impossible to justify this for this sort of audience. So therefore, I think it's quite real, this scenario that you have very hard restrictions in financing international cooperation. And again, the question prepared by Tomás was, what could of consequences this could have for cooperation with Latin America? I have again in the list Christina, and Jochen. I don't know who wants to start.
You are right. And we are all fearing this. It's still, for me, it's still like a kind of nightmare. But it came a little bit real after the elections in 3 federal states where the right-wing AfD won really high percentages. And we can see this in the public discussion in Germany, that they set the topics. And they are talking about migration and all the huge problem about migration. And it's, yeah, I still do not know how this will be in federal elections next year. And of course, this will challenge funding, internationalization, and what I said in my last intervention. We are also we are not. Yes, we are talking about migration, and we keep up bringing in our perspective from Latin America. We are keeping up spaces of discussion, and I fear that it will be difficult to keep up all these spaces and places we have at the moment in Germany to go on with the bold, with vacas gordas. In this case, yeah, I don't have a solution, but we have to think about how to cope with this crisis, and probably we can learn from Latin America how to survive in like Sebrap survived military dictatorship in Brazil and kept up spaces to discuss in this house. I mean, okay, this is a kind of black nightmare, but yeah, I'm sure it will change the funding of probably of the Ministry of Education, because we have to yes, we have to communicate this to the taxpayers. What are they doing with our tax money? And having talked with many Argentinian colleagues in the last days, they say they are challenged by the government, who says, "Oh, you are privileged. You have so many privileges, and it's not justified that you have this privileges. You are indoctrinating our students," and so on. And I think this is a discourse that is not so far from a German right-wing discourse. Sorry that I have such a black contribution. Probably one of the next speakers has a vision.
I don't know. Yeah, well, I don't know if I can contribute with so many new thoughts or considerations on that. Partly I share what you already said, Christine. But I will try to be a little bit more optimistic, if I may. And would like to stress a little bit more the success story that I already mentioned, at least when it comes to co-funding with regard to the collaboration with Latin America. And I think one point lies in strengthen maybe research communication. I think this is one thing we will have to do to have this as a message, that we also establish these spaces that you mentioned of discourse, of diversity, also in Germany. I think this is very important. And I think we have very good examples with the Merian funding on the one hand, and then also with two international research graduate schools that we have co-funded with Mexico in the last decades. This is a very strong, very ambitious collaboration that has worked very well, and which only shows what kind of mature academic relation, and a partnership relation we have with Latin America. And I can't see yet that anyone is really targeting that and wanting to cut this, at least when it comes to DFG funding. I think what also comes in here, and this is maybe positive also about the DFG, yes, it is public money, but the DFG at least is still a national funding organization, and every project that is then being evaluated at the DFG is first evaluated in the national system. And when it comes to international collaboration, always co-funding comes in. So maybe the internationality is not always likewise visible as with other international funding partners that are much more targeted maybe at that point when it comes to budget cuts. So at least I think this is maybe a slightly positive message at that point when we look at it from a funding perspective.
Yeah, I think it's obviously a quite challenging question, and it's easy to be pessimistic about the general political environment, but also in the concrete way regarding our centers. So no, when we made the application for for the last phase of funding provided by the German Ministry of Education and Investigation. It was clear, no, that it will be less than in the main phase, but due to the current political context in Europe, the reduction was even or went even further than as we expected when we planned the transition phase. But I would also like to add something like optimistic perspective, as Christina did, because no, we have many lessons learned in the last couple of years. So, and then when we thought about our application for the final phase, then our idea was to cut as less as possible on our research program, on our successful research formats. But for example, and it's obviously nothing new, that now the pandemic has also taught us now that we can integrate presential and hybrid modes or virtual forms of collaboration. That there are other ways to create synergies and no to kind of use the capital of collaboration that we all have created in in the last 7-8 years at these centers to continue the work, because no, the idea when the Merian initiative was launched, and it's not about collaborative research program like SFB, no, known in Germany, who are working on a specific topic. And it's not just a program; it's about a center. So no, to create an institution that, of course, no, has an important co-financiation by the German Ministry of Education and Investigation, but it's not the sole financiation. No, all the institutions, and maybe it hasn't been stressed enough, but it's no, CALAS is not only a center in Mexico, in Guadalajara, but we also have now our hubs in Costa Rica and Argentina and in Ecuador. Mecila does also now have collaborations at other venues in Latin America. So what we have created at both centers in the last couple of years is an important infrastructure which does not depend on solely on one foot, but no, has I think a much broader fundament. Of course, it would be great if like the DFG or other funding institutions would have instruments that will enable us to continue these broad collaborations between many partners in Latin America and in Germany, and maybe in other parts of the world, and even in the Nordic countries, if we add some value to the collaboration. But I think for this part, I'm not so pessimistic about the future of these kind of collaborations, because even so, nationalism is on the rising, but it's still, no, we are in a very international environment, and no, where no, the collaboration beyond borders will remain an important feature to produce knowledge no, in the future. So therefore, no, at least for I think for our centers, we will continue after after the funding from Germany will end. Not sure how, and no, different ideas, and probably Mecila and CALAS will work with different partners and no, with different structures. Yeah, but I think the fundament we laid is so solid that it's no, that it's quite possible and very likely that there are solutions to the budget problem.
I want to add something. Yeah. I want to add now something more positive. Perhaps a term that brought up Susanne is what we really managed to create is mutual trust. And mutual trust means that this is something that is beyond financiation, that we know that we have a community of Latin American researchers who understand our position and vice versa. And so, and I already talking about the synergy effects, I realized that this is at the initiation of other projects, that you have counterpartners with whom you gather and you figure out more other projects apart from CALAS. And I think or Mecila. And I think that's also a work we have done. This is more idealistic or a point, but this is also very important what we did in the last years, and that this goes beyond questions of how do we finance after the transition phase.
Yeah, so I don't expect that we will have in Germany, in Europe, a sort of political intervention in the academic and scientific system as we have had in Brazil under Bolsonaro, and we have just also observed in Argentina with Milei. So, but anyway, at the end, we can learn from these two experiences, how actually also the academic community was able, to a certain extent, to react, to resist to interventions. But at the end of the day, if you have such a powerful intervention, as in case of Argentina, in which the whole scientific system is destroyed, so the academic community is not able, even using transnational networks and so on, to resist against this such as attacks. In case of Brazil, if I look at the experience under Bolsonaro, I think it was quite evident that the sort of transnational, international solidarity was crucial for Brazilians scientists to resist against this sort of intervention. So also in Germany, we had some initiatives, I don't know, even some letters signed by different colleagues and so produce some effects in order to protect these colleagues against persecution and also cuts of funding for political reasons. Now, let's go to the last question from Thomas' list, and this question is about South-South cooperation. So you have actually experience with both forms of cooperation, North-South cooperation. So CALAS and Mecila were supposed to be, at least at the beginning, a North-South cooperation. But I think both centers were able to transform our possibilities also to promote South cooperation within Latin America. And the question is, how do you see how to compare both forms of cooperation, and what kind of measures could be taken for reinforcing South cooperation, particularly in Latin America? And I have now in the list Jaime, Jochen, and Peter. So if you'd like to start.
This question, it seems related to two main themes that are the perspective, the comparative research perspective, and the other one is the South-South and North-South relations. I think theoretically, the laboratories and the platforms that derive from them, as well as the fellows and the transatlantic tandems, operate their activities under a South-South logic. This is reflected in the research topics addressed in these three areas. Since Latin America, and not so much the Caribbean, we must say that, is the geographical reference area. Implicit in the thematic definition of the laboratories is a vision of South-South relations. However, there are no explicit requirements in the platform's calls for proposals to address South-South issues, but rather it is something spontaneous that may refer to a case, a country, a group of countries, and rarely to Latin America and the Caribbean as a whole. Nor is there a methodological intentionality to define the scope or meaning of the ontology of the South in itself, in its relationship with the North and its global projection, global South and global North. There is no frameworks or theoretical or methodological references to address South-South relations. In the case of transatlantic tandems, we work from a South-North perspective with a comparative methodology, certainly. The counterpart is German and not so much European, but in the research experiences, a certain horizontal communications between the parties concerned has been achieved. So far, the predominant part is Latin American. There is no German present that is equal to that of Latin America. But the experience of South-North cooperation has been positive because it strengthens the educational institutions of both continents and because comparative methodologies are exercised. However, it is a pity that the organization of the transatlantic tandems will disappear in the new stage of CALAS for the next 4 years. Among the institutional measures that can strengthen South-South relation, I suggest promoting research to serve as a reference on the geopolitical character that these relations currently have at the economic, social, and cultural levels, and on the forms of South-South integration that are currently operating. A kind of framework research that allows for the identification of the web of actors, collective actions, social movements, and that can identify alternatives of social state and political orientation. All this in a frame of reference that allows to identify the contradictions that South-South relations are going through in the face of the so-called world order, globalization, and the different spatial scales on which powers are sustained. Last, I think that we must make a kind of survey about what kind of webs or of kind of nets are developing in our region, and I identify some of them. One is the Red de Intelectuales del Sur. It's a kind of frame, very, very interesting because it is from volunteers. It has no financement status, but anyway, it's very creative and innovative. Other one is the Pacto Ecosocial e Intercultural del Sur. It's another report beginning from the roots of the ecological and intercultural problems that we must have some kind of dialogue. And this is part of what I mean by making a survey about that kind of nets or webs. Other one is also at the north. I read about Red Sur Sur at Spain. I don't remember exactly if it is the Universidad Tecnológica de Madrid or the Complutense de Madrid. But anyway, I have here the web page for the reference. Other one that is very, very near to us is the program Sur of Claxo. That is very, very interesting because the 5 continents are already making some linkages, some agreements between them. And the last one that I would like to call about is the Proyecto Redes Sur-Sur. That is another kind of effort that is not a government or not a research group, but some kind of autonomous initiatives that are very important to see through and to make it clear where they are and what they do.
Sí. Bueno, no me siento muy cómodo responder a una pregunta sobre las relaciones sur-sur en ese espacio, porque obviamente no tengo el mismo conocimiento que Jaime, por ejemplo, pero digamos, de nuestro contexto, tal vez 2 o 3 puntos. O sea, como se ha explicado, CALAS funciona como un centro policéntrico, entonces, ¿no? Que conecta diferentes regiones dentro de América Latina y con Alemania. Y cuando pasamos ahora por el proceso de evaluación, creo que no estoy ahora hablando de, o sea, ningún secreto de Estado, pero una cosa que nos preguntaron es cómo vamos a fortalecer las relaciones entre los diferentes sedes en América Latina, que ¿no? En nuestra estructura anterior, con los laboratorios que se habían mencionado, siempre era un socio en Alemania que colabora con un socio en América Latina. Y ahora la pregunta era cómo conectamos más los socios en América Latina. Entonces esto era como algo lo que en nuestra siguiente fase vamos a fortalecer, porque también ¿no? los problemas son obviamente comunes en la región, entonces eso es ¿no? dentro de nuestro esquema y uno de los retos lo que vamos a enfrentar, conectar más a las sedes en América Latina. Más allá de nuestro contexto específico, creo que, claro, los contextos políticos son diferentes. Ahora, obviamente, ¿no? La situación en Argentina es muy preocupante como lo era antes aquí en Brasil, pero creo que aún así se podía tratar en ese contexto, con esas experiencias que se han creado, un poco ver, ¿no? Cómo se pueden conectar, ¿no? Los diferentes agencias de promoción a la investigación, el CONICET, el CONACYT, CAPES, FONDECYT en los diferentes países para no específicamente tomar esos ejemplos de los centros Merian como ejemplo, pero para ver, ¿no? Qué tipo de colaboración en el área de la investigación, más allá de la movilidad individual para mandar estudiantes o centros a otros países, ¿no? Se podían crear y fomentar. Entonces, esto es algo, lo que sé es tal vez un poco utópico, pero algo, ¿no? Lo que funciona más o menos bien en la Unión Europea con esos programas de colaboración entre diferentes países, ¿no? Creo que sería un reto interesante en algún futuro, ojalá cercano, para la región, para crear ese tipo de sinergias y de proyectos colaborativos.
Well, in the case of Mecila, actually, besides the north-south relations, there is a lot of south-south relations that are actually at the heart of the structure of the center. just like actually CALAS and all the other Merian Centers, which I think is very important to create also connections. And of course, all of the Merian Centers in a way are networks. And the network character is not just being granted by financing certain structures, which of course is very important to have all the fellows. It's fundamental actually, and we hope we can give continuity to it, which would be financing from Brazil and maybe other institutions. We shall see how this all works. But actually what we have constructed over the last more than 8 years approximately, actually is a network of researchers that actually cooperate on a personal level. I think that's really, really important. And these are very interesting projects actually, and there are many sub-projects, what has been mentioned here, of the polycentric or multicentric structure is really true for the Merian Centers and for Mecila in particular. So a lot of people have mounted their own projects and even have gained other third-party funding. That's very important. So there are other projects that have brought in money, which is not the money from the BMBF, to actually finance really projects which are in a way also seeds for other future projects. So just to give some examples, at the very structure of Mecila, we have the exchange between CEBRAP USP and also Universidad de La Plata, IRIX, and also Colegio de México. So there is actually a project where researchers from these 4 Latin American institutions go to some of the other institutions which they elect to do a collaborative project together. So actually this is, I think, really great about Mecila, that it mounts projects not only on the axis of north-south, but between different Latin American institutions, academic institutions. So I think this is important, and I think this will have a long-lasting effect also. So that's one thing. But then also, in terms of all the fellows who have been at the center, there are many contacts and even projects. Some of our former fellows, actually, they work in other South contexts with financing also. Then what we have done, for example, to just give one recent example, that we have actually organized a project at the Universidade Federal de Roraima, which is really off the center, really also thinking about center and periphery within Brazil or Latin America. So there actually has been created strong ties. Also the strong ties that have been created with some of the partners we have from civil society, with some of the partners we have from the sectors of art and activism, which we do still work with and which we will continue to work with independently of the financiation of the BMBF. So in short, and to sum up in regard to that aspect, I think this is something very important of the BMBF projects, of the Merian Centers, that they created these structures that also work within the South-South. And also, this is a very good example, I think, of it. CALAS, Mecila, but also MECAM and other centers in the South. So there is, of course, Tunis, there's Accra, and there's New Delhi, and there have been, and Thomas is a good example of someone who has been actually mounting also corporations and other people of the PIs also. So I think this is really something very promising, and this would be, again, a bit more of a positive outlook. But then again, we're trying to prolong the center and to gain financing for it, even for the period after the so-called third period after that. So I think also the center being in Sao Paulo is actually I think it was a very wise choice with FAPESP. I'm looking at Sergio and Susanna. A very wise choice, actually, to have the center really in Sao Paulo, because even the laws of the funding, they're so strong that even a right-wing government would not easily, and this was during Bolsonaro also the case, would not easily dismount it. So I think continuity on a South-South axis is, I think, quite in an optimistic perspective, quite possible, and also not to lose sight of that. Still, continuing, sorry, our relations we have at FU, at the University of Cologne, and at the Ibero-American Institute in the case of the Merian Center, Mecila, is very important to also continue that.